Hi there, welcome to Games Over Qualia. My name is Devon. These videos work in 3 different parts. First, you send me your game and you fill out this form about your intended experience. Second, I'll play the game completely blind and then I explain what I think the game was trying to do. Third, I compare my blind experience with your intended experience and we'll see if they align or if they don't. Today's game is called Diecast. There we go. Today's game is called Diecast, and it was developed by Sofamir, and it was developed by this person here. This is the only thing they wanted me to know about it. So knowing that, let's play the game. Okay, I have just played the game Diecast, and this game is it's pretty neat. It's a pretty neat game. I have recorded my first impressions right here. Granted, these aren't really my first impressions. This kind of landed in a weird place for me on my timeline, so this is probably like my 4th impressions, if there was a number. Anyway, but they're much more articulate than my first impressions, so anyway, so let's listen to that while we watch some of my gameplay. So first of all, when I had played this game before, it very much reminded me of Balatro, like the whole everything about it, like the main menu, and then you have your multipliers and you have modifiers, and then you can buy more dice, you know, pretty much everything that you could do in Balatro. Because this is a lot like Balatro in terms of the layout, and I guess also in terms of mechanics, because it does have multipliers in the same way, I would say that this game, because I want to compare this game to Balatro so much, it doesn't feel like Balatro. So when I'm playing it, I'm expecting like a game that's kind of like Balatro, but it's not. It is, in terms of the way that the points kind of add up and in the way that you buy other dice and the other types of mechanics. But because of the base kind of game, because it's Yahtzee and not poker, they're different. And it's also different because of the different types of randomness that either of them have. First of all, I'm a very big Balatro fan. And it's funny because I'm actually not a big fan of deck builders. And I think the reason why I love Balatro so much and I don't like games like Slay the Spire or Inscription or Magic the Gathering, I don't really like deck builders that much. And the reason why is primarily because of all the information that I have to hold in my head. And the reason why I like Balatro so much, I discovered this while playing it and analyzing the way that it does its calculations and everything. I found out that Balatro kind of brings everything to the surface. GMTK made a video kind of about this, not really. He made a video that was talking about how the designer of Balatro, he liked the feeling that you got from watching the player build up this kind of Rube Goldberg machine. You would understand that all these things that you've put into place would then provide you with some sort of crazy amount of points, right? And then when you play your cards, it doesn't just give you the points right then and there and you're done. It steps through each and every one and it shows you what is doing what. And that really, really caught my attention. And I really liked Balatro for that reason, because what that did was it took this internalization that I've had trouble with all these kinds of deck builders, and it made it external, right? So I don't need to memorize. I mean, I don't necessarily need to memorize any deck builders, but that's just kind of where my brain goes. I always have to internalize all the information, and I know I don't have to. That's just the way that my brain works. And so when I'm playing Balatro, there's times that I forget exactly what a joker does or when it does its specific thing because I haven't internalized everything. But then when it plays out, it kind of reminds me every single hand that I play which joker is doing what and which cards are doing what. And because it's doing all that, it's kind of like building a muscle of recognizability, right? Where I can play my cards and then suddenly I remember all the things that I, put together. And so it never leaves my brain because it's constantly being reminded to me. With that being said, Diecast does not do that. Diecast is very much a dice builder in the same way that many deck builders are, where you have a bunch of dice and you have a bunch of these pins that basically act like the jokers did in Balatro, where they modify the behavior of the dice. And then you have your score pads on the left, which are ones that you can buy. Whereas Yahtzee already has a whole bunch of different types of categories you can score your dice in. This one only starts out with 4, and you need to buy different types of scoring pads. And I really like the way that they have this. Like, the score pads are really cool. You can do things like have a Fibonacci sequence. You can have all evens or a pair of dice, snake eyes. And that's another thing about these dice, is that the dice can have multiple sides. So sometimes you don't just have a regular D6 cube dice. You can buy things like a D4 or a D20 or dice that copy the abilities of other dice or copy sides of other dice. I really like the ingenuity here. I really like the innovation. What gets me about it is that because I want to compare this so much to Balatro, because of how similar the setup is and how similar the mechanics are, it feels like it should be the same, and it's not. So I don't have that same type of Rube Goldberg machine playing out. All I do is I roll my dice, and then suddenly when I start stacking them, when I start holding the ones that I want to play, then it just shows my total, immediately on one of the scoring pads. While that's appreciated, because like I had heard from GMTK, there's a lot of people that play deck builders who play Balatro and really don't like that they can't see their total score immediately. That doesn't bother me in the slightest. But in diecast, this would make those deck building people very happy. But for me, it kind of gets on my nerves because when I'm playing this game, I can't see how I got the points that I did. Now I can, break it down afterwards. If I roll the dice and then I start, stacking the ones and I see suddenly I've got 5,000 points on one card, I'm like, oh, how did I get that, right? And I go over there and I look at the breakdown. It has a little breakdown. It says this times this times this. And then I go look at my dice and I look at the values and I look at the pins and I look at the experience level that I have on my scorecard. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess that does make sense. And then I'll continue. And it's just that over and over. So usually whenever I'm rolling my dice, I am trying to go for something, but I often forget exactly what the details are that are involved. And I forget how many different types of pins that I have and what specific things they're doing because I can't internalize all that information. It's not something that I always have on hand. And so because of that, it's really difficult for me to remember all the specific things that go into getting a specific score on a roll. And because of that also, it's really difficult for me to understand what rolls are the best ones to go for without, going back through my pins and looking through all of them and then looking through all my scorecards to see which ones have the best level. That's another thing about these scorecards is that you can upgrade all of the scorecards. And the way you do so isn't always by buying them, but I think by building up your experience points, if I remember this correctly. If you score one scorecard over and over and over, then it builds up its experience, which I think makes it level up. I'm not exactly sure. I'll have to check that out. But you can definitely upgrade your scorecards in the shop. So while I like all of the really interesting aspects of this game, it plays like Balatro in some way, and I just don't have the same experience whatsoever. Now that's completely on me. I understand, that when I'm playing this game, that I should not think of it as playing Balatro, but it's just really difficult for me to do that when it's very visually similar. That isn't to say that the game doesn't have its own artistic identity. It really does, and the mechanics themselves are different enough from Balatro to separate it completely. It's not a clone whatsoever. When I play the game, I definitely am hearkening back to Balatro, and I really want to know what my scores are and how I got there. And I end up missing those kind of Rube Goldberg machine kind of things from Balatro. And I feel myself wanting to understand how I got those specific scores, because to me, they're just numbers, right? I just roll the dice and then suddenly I have a big number and I'm like, oh, I don't know how I got that, but okay, I guess I'll go with that one. And it's just that over and over and over. So you can tell that with that kind of strategy, at least in my brain, I'm not your kind of average deck builder player for sure. But when I play this game and I don't really have an understanding of all of my pins and all of my experience, it really weakens my strategy as I go forward. And I end up doing things that are probably not the best for the gameplay, simply because I'm not understanding all of it all at once. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is something that's more systemic. This is just something that I noticed. This might not be a thing that everyone else has with this game, but it's definitely something that I noticed. It was the types of probabilities that happen with diecast as opposed to a different game like Balatro or any other deck builder. I want to compare this game to a deck builder, but it's probably better to compare this game to a Yahtzee. Now, on the surface, I think that works, right? If I go into a game like Yahtzee and I just start pulling out all different types of dice and I just roll a bunch of them, that's really funny. I really like that idea. But this is not Yahtzee. Yahtzee is different, right? When you're playing Yahtzee, Yahtzee is based on luck because you have 5 dice. You roll those dice and you can improve your probability. For example, if you roll a bunch of dice and you get, we'll say, a 1, 4, a 3, a 5, and another 1, maybe you look at that and you say, hey, I want to get 4 my 1s. So you pull your 1s aside and you roll the other 3 dice. But when you roll those other 3 dice, it's then again resetting the probability. You're now saying, okay, I'm hoping to get more ones out of these, but it's still going to be luck. It's not going to be anything necessarily controlled. The reason why I think that matters is because Yahtzee is very much a luck type of game. It's a game that's not really meant to be controlled. It's kind of a game that where you roll dice and then you deal with whatever type of outcome you have. And the way that you deal with that is with all this plethora of different types of scoring. You can score between your 1s and 6s. You can score in 3 of a kind, full house, all different kinds of things. When you're going for a very specific type of dice roll, you can't guarantee it, right? You can only have a pretty good probability. And I feel like that's kind of the reason why Yahtzee is kind of just looked at as a family game that's meant for any age, because it's kind of the same no matter who plays it, because it's always a luck-based game. It's literally dice rolls, right? There's not a whole lot of control in the game other than selectively determining what types of dice should do certain things afterwards, not beforehand, but afterwards. What's weird about this is that diecast treats this kind of like a deck builder, where you have specific dice that you want to do specific things. For example, there's one that has 6 different sides. 5 of them are 1s, and 1 of them is a 100. That's a good dice for if you want to do something like score only 1s. There's a pin that you can get for getting bonus points when you're scoring 1s. That's something that I would look at and say, oh yeah, that's good. But you're still going to have, a 1 out of 6 probability chance of getting that 100. Same with all these other dice. It doesn't matter what dice you have when you roll them, it's still going to be random. And the reason why that's different is because when you're in Balatro, you're building your deck by buying specific types of cards. And you know that when you draw from your deck, that if you didn't get it in your hand then, you will still have that card within your deck somewhere. And that means that if you draw again, you'll have a higher chance of getting that card because you're modifying the system itself. It's not completely random. Completely random would be if you drew 8 cards and then shuffled them back into the deck every time that you did a new draw. That would be completely random. And that's kind of what you're doing in diecast. Every time that you roll your dice, you're again resetting that whole probability system, and you're not modifying it at all. I would say your probabilities in here are fixed, whereas your probabilities in like a deck builder are converging, where your probability of getting the card that you want grows as you draw more cards from the deck because the deck gets smaller and smaller. And so instead of having a 1 in 52 chance, you have a 1 in 48 chance, and then 1 in 36 chance, 1 in, it just keeps going down. And I wouldn't say this is really that much of an issue. It's just different in terms of the way that you have to think about how you score in this game versus how you score in a game like Balatro. And it's weird when I play this game that I want to compare it to Balatro and not Yahtzee. I, for one, really like Yahtzee. I think Yahtzee is a lot of fun, but I would say it's completely for a different reason than diecast. I'd say diecast feels like it's meant to be a deck builder, but it's using a lot more luck than most deck builders would. At least as far as I'm concerned, I haven't played many deck builders. So with that being said, it's hard for me to understand what kind of strategy I should be trying to control here. I'm not sure if my control is even present in the game. It feels like my control is pretty limited. This channel survives because of Patreon members and donations from viewers like you, PBS, right? You can make a donation if you want. There's a link in the description. Otherwise, let us continue. So I have the questions right here. Question number 1 was, what were you hoping the player would feel while playing your game? This dev answered, I wanted the player to feel engaged and excited about building different strategies as they go through a run, having a build that they're going for, but also the excitement of changing a build on the fly. I wanted the player to feel there's a possibility that their build isn't good enough and may not get them through to the end. My second question was, why did you choose this experience as opposed to a different one? The dev answered, diecast is a game that I made for myself first because I wanted to make a version of Yahtzee that was fun to play and a surprise every time. It's supposed to be an engaging solitaire style experience with added depth. It's like a mechanical puzzle, finding which dice, items, and score work together, and then deeper than that, finding ways to game the system, like make extra money, sell off scores that won't be used for early cash flow, etc. Question number 3 was, were there specific moments, mechanics, or ideas that you built around that emotional goal? This dev answered, dopamine hits from big numbers, but also from finding an overpowered build. It sounds like this dev wanted to basically make Balatro, but it seems like it. Balatro is very heavy on the mind right now, and I have already talked about this in my previous notes, but I might not be fair here, and I apologize for that. That's just the way that I am working at the moment when I can't be fair. I don't want to be fair. No, I'm just kidding. The game very much reminds me of Balatro in several different respects. And so whenever I play the game, I keep thinking of Balatro in comparison. I know it's not the same game, it's not the same mechanics, but that's just the way that I feel going into this. And it might not just be because of the look, particularly because I've been playing Balatro a lot myself lately. But also, I was a bit of a internet sleuth and went onto Reddit to see if this game was posted previously, to see what this developer had said about the game. And to the dev, you called this game Balatro but dice. I don't know if you made this game for yourself first and then kind of transitioned it to kind of like a more Balatro styled kind of thing so that someone could recognize it, as like, oh, that's like a Balatro type of game. That's probably my jam, go into that, which I don't think is a bad strategy. Exactly, but I do think that this game can stand on its own and should be its own kind of thing. And I like the aesthetic that you have, the whole like magical looking thing where the whole thing is like this one hand. Anyway, I like that the hand is like this little character that you have. I think that's pretty cool. So their first answer, they said that they wanted the player to feel engaged and excited, building different strategies, going through a run and having a build that they're going for. The two strategies that I went with was, one of them was just doing all ones, with the snake eyes score being the big one, and then I had like a 3 of a kind one that was like the big one because I had pins that give me high multipliers on things that were like smaller than 5 dice, and then odd numbers on top of that. So a bunch of different things. So I thought it was interesting. The mechanics definitely worked in that sense. I feel hesitant to call it much of a strategy. It is a strategy. I'm not sure why I would feel hesitant to call it that. Maybe it's because I didn't feel like there was a ton of control over everything. And I mentioned this in my notes, but I feel like the biggest thing that's keeping me away from feeling like I'm fully in control of everything. And I use that term control because strategy is, very much a form of control that you're giving to the game, or at least that's how I see it. What keeps me at bay from complete control is rolling the dice, because every time that I roll the dice, it's random, right? I just have to give my trust to the dice and hope that I get something. Now, that can be mitigated a little bit between the types of dice that you choose. There are some dice that only give like odd numbers, for example. So you might have a pin that says, you get a multiplier when you score odd dice. You get a dice that has odd numbers on it only, and then you might have a scorecard that has all odds on it, something like that. In that sense, yeah, there is a strategy that you could build in that sense. You have to, the way that you have to think about this game is different than Balatro, and I think that's the reason why I keep getting confused over it, is because this game, diecast, is very different. It's very different from deck builders, and I'm calling this a deck builder because the idea that you're building, dice, that you're a dice builder, right? You're selecting certain dice and you're basically creating a custom set of things that you want in order to score other things. But it's that randomness that I feel keeps me a little bit more at bay. But I do like those types of dice that have, for certain specific types of values, like the odd dice. I think that's really cool. Or the even dice, or the ones that have increments of 10, right? Like a percentage dice. I think those are really, really interesting because those completely cull the idea of randomness away, right? You don't have, it's not always just, a run through 12 or a 1 through 20 or 1 through 4. It's not just any value in between those. Sometimes they are just specifically odd or just even or a Fibonacci sequence. I think that's really cool. So I think that the randomness is kind of, I talked about randomness a little bit in my notes, but I think it's mitigated a little bit from those specific types of dice. So I do think those work really well. This is interesting. I just now thought about this, but in Balatro, which you have to forgive me again, I keep going back to Balatro, but the entire game is kind of focused around the jokers. And it's interesting because I think the jokers, they're fun. They're a lot of fun. But there's a lot of different elements to the game, right? There's the tarot cards, there's the vouchers you can get, there's the whole deck of cards that you have that, can be modified in different ways and whatnot. So that's all really cool. But the jokers themselves, they're just kind of like a extra kind of thing. It's like, hey, you can modify, a bunch of different values. And I love the jokers, but it doesn't seem like that is the main pull of the game. And yet, it kind of is, right? Because it feels like you're unlocking jokers. They have different types of ranks, right? You have the common, uncommon, rare, and they sit at the top of the screen, right? They all have very wild different types of art for them. The jokers in here are the pins, right? The little pins. And this is just a visual thing for me, but the pins feel like they're secondary to everything. In the shop, there are these little tiny pins that you have at the top right corner, and I forget they're there. When I'm in the shop, I have to go, oh, right, there's pins over here. And they're, by far the most helpful in the game, like the jokers. They'll add multiplications or more points to your dice and modify how your score sits, right? Like a lot of times I would get a bunch of multipliers that would do a specific type of thing, like 2 multipliers that had a ×2 when I would score less than 5 dice. And so when I did that on top of having ones or anything like that, I'd put like a 3 of a kind of ones, and suddenly I get like 15,000 points as opposed to what I would usually get, which is like 80 points or something. So the pins to me feel like the pull of the game instead of the dice themselves. They seem to be treated as just kind of bonus objects that are just over here on the side, which is fine. It's just when I compare that to Balatro, I think of how Balatro is like almost centered around the jokers. The jokers seem to be very important to the game, and they are, but it just seems like they're centered differently. Imagine if the jokers were treated like the pins that they have in the game, right? Those little squares that you have at the bottom of the blinds when you choose a blind. Like if those were the most, like it doesn't feel like those pins are the most important element of the game. That's what I mean. It feels visually distant. That's what it feels like. I was just editing my video and I saw that there was this part where I was talking about the pins in diecast are like the jokers. But it seems like diecast is much more centered around the scoring pads as opposed to the jokers in Balatro. So Balatro almost disregards the poker hands. They don't really care about them at all. They don't even show you what poker hands you can make. But then the jokers are like the big thing. Diecast, I was wondering why the score pads were so large and took up such a big part of the screen and had such a big art on all of them. And I like that, right? I do like the scorecards. I like the way they look, and I like that you can buy them and everything. They're definitely important, and it definitely seems like with this type of game that the scorecards are what they're giving all of the importance, right? The pins themselves on the side that act kind of like jokers are just kind of secondary. Everything is based on those score pads. And I think the issue for me is that when I roll these dice and I'm trying to get a specific score, it's cool that I can score the dice on these different types of score pads, but it's more than that, right? I need to be hitting a goal of some sort. The goal is how many points I'm getting, and the points are more attributed to the multipliers on the side as opposed to the scoring pads themselves. So the scoring pads definitely enable you to create some type of score, but in the same kind of way, Balatro is kind of built around poker hands. It's as if what you did was took Balatro and made the main appeal the poker hands themselves, right? That you could unlock certain poker hands or buy certain poker hands. And while that does sound fun, that would be really cool, I feel like that's kind of sidestepping the types of points that you're getting. Like upgrading each of the poker hands in Balatro definitely gives you a big point advantage. And so in that same sense, yeah, upgrading these score slots on diecast definitely gives you the same type of advantage. And it's really cool to have that right in front of my face. That's cool, and I like that they are there. But if getting the points is the goal of the game, like trying to get past a specific type of threshold of points, which it is, I would feel like the multipliers and the values of the dice should be the strongest things. It's just interesting to see the differences between these two, to see that Balatro really gives a lot of importance to those jokers visually, and diecast gives a lot of importance to the quote-unquote poker hands, right? The different types of scores that you can do with the dice. And that might be one of the reasons why I never felt super attached to the output of my points, because I was definitely focused on trying to get specific types of scores. I was trying to get a 3 of a kind, or I was trying to get a 2 pair, but I was never trying to get 10,000 points. I was never trying to get 15,000 points, 20,000 points. Those things kind of came afterwards. I would roll my dice. I'm like, oh, great. I have enough dice to make one of these scores. Fantastic. But that's not really what I'm trying to do, right? I'm trying to get enough points. So I think it's that amount of points that never really fully seated in my mind. The visuals of the game seem to pull me toward trying to get specific types of scores as opposed to specific types of points. I think that's what I'm getting at here. The leveling up of each scorecard, that's difficult to understand because it's just a little tiny bar on the left side, and there's a little white number that I think is the level of your card. And then in order to understand the multiplicative, process that card has in scoring, you have to hover over it or right click on it and see which things are sparkling. It's a lot of little things you got to look for, and none of this stuff is standing out to me except for the biggest things, which are my scorecards, right? My scorecards say, hey, you have a pair. So I know what those are, but as far as how leveled up they are, how powerful they are, I don't really know. I still don't really understand the leveling up process of each of these scorecards. And I do know that you can level them up in the shop, and I think you level them up with experience points too. But that's the thing is, like, I'm not sure. Like, I can see the level up part, and I think that graphic is done really well where you have a little blue level up, and it has the arrows going up. I think that's cool. But it doesn't tell me what the value is, and I feel like I want to see that. I would compare that to when you're playing an action game, and I talked about this before in like arcade games and stuff. There was a game that I talked about called Scrambled Eggs some time ago, and it's a reverse crossy road. You play as the cars and you try to crush chickens, basically, and it's a funny game. There's a link in the description if you want to check it out. And the first time that I played that game, it's very much this numbers go up kind of game, right? There's a bunch of chickens that are going from the left to the right, and you're trying to use the biggest and fastest cars that you have to crush as many of them as possible. But in that type of gameplay, what you want to know is how many points you're getting. In the visuals, it's funny to see all the visuals, but one of my main criticisms with the game was that you couldn't see the point values. And so I had pointed out that the point values should be big and bright, and they should grow like in size and color, changed color, right? When you're getting more and more things, like growing like a combo, But I think about like Super Smash Brothers, for example, and their percentage, every time that you hit it, it gets darker and darker and darker. And you can just tell at a glance. You don't even really need to know the point values, but you can just tell at a glance what's happening, right? You can tell someone that has really dark red values that they're going to be dead soon, right? Their percentage is really high. And you can just tell that just by looking at it. That's a good thing. It's that kind of like instant like visual measurement that happens. And I feel like that's what's missing here. I want to see the scorecards do something or like somehow grow in a different way to show me visually that they're going to be really beefy, right? Or they're going to give me a lot of points. I want to see that happen. I want to know how they're giving me points. I want to know which of the pins because I know you have sparkles right now, right? There's little sparkle things that come out, and it shows you which pins are active and which of these scores are active with the dice that you're selecting, and I think that's fine. But I feel like I need more visual stuff. I need to know when I'm leveling up, how much I'm leveling up, right? And what exactly it's doing, and which of these pins are more rare than other ones. I know that you have a little color code system, but the color code system is just kind of a color system. It could be that the color coding system to me is just not working so much in my mind, because every time that I play this game, it seems very colorful already. There's just so much going on. It's very, very bright and very personality driven, but I'm not sure if my eyes are really drawn to anything specific. I had to play this game a lot of times in order for me to really ground myself and understand what each individual thing was, because there's a lot here. So it's a lot to unpack. I think your tutorial did a pretty good job onboarding. Everything seems very similar when it comes to the visuals. Everything seems to demand my attention all at once. And so it feels like nothing is demanding my attention because of that. But for that reason, that's probably the reason why I want to see more game juice when it comes to these scoring up things, because I want to see them. I want to see what is happening with my dice and everything. And this is just coming from me. And you have to understand that a person like myself, I am very visually oriented and very goal oriented. So I really like and align with action games, but not so much these types of more methodical types of games. I really align with Balatro because they make everything externalized. And you don't necessarily have to make your game like that. There's other games that are like other deck builders out there that don't necessarily have all the steps. And there's some people that don't want all those things, right? There was a GMTK video, I mentioned this in my notes, where he talks about there's a bunch of people that want those scores. They want those totals. I don't want the totals. I want to see it build up. That's why this is Games Over Qualia. This is just my subjective experience. I'll be honest, I did get, some dopamine hits from seeing my big numbers. I think that kind of game juice is really cool, where the score is like going crazy, right, when you get these big numbers. And I love the idea where I feel overpowered, right? In the very beginning when I get 20,000 points for like a 4,000 point goal. I think that was really fun. And in that sense, it does kind of feel like I'm gaming the system a little bit. I didn't feel like I was addicted to it in the same way that I was with Balatro, or am with Balatro, where I feel like I can see the future of what I'm doing. Part of that might be the probability thing, but I think another part is just, again, not knowing exactly what things are happening at which times. So those are all my thoughts on Diecast. Thank you so much for submitting this game. If you are a developer who has not submitted a game to me, you can, but I have a wait list. I'm already at capacity for this year. So the wait list may not happen, but it is available to you if you so desire. There's also a Discord if you'd like to talk to other developers, many of which have submitted games here. Thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you guys later.